featuring the people who make York special.
It's the warmness and it's the humour. The people who make it.
The people who work in the factory are very, very proud of the fact that this is the home of Kit Kat.
And the organisations doing amazing things.
A fair number of women say that Kira has saved their lives, so we know we make a big difference.
From tourism and history to business, charity and the arts.
We are as equally important in the history of this country as London is and as Oxford is.
I love the idea that York becomes the UK's alternative to London.
This is Between These Walls, a podcast for York with Sophie Hudson. If you were to wander down Swinegate, a seemingly normal street in the centre of York, you may not be aware that you're passing a little slice of Hollywood. Viridian FX is a visual effects house working on movies and TV series for the likes of Netflix and HBO. If you're a fan of the Game of Thrones spin-off House of the Dragon, then what you saw on screen was made possible by a team right here in the centre of York. And with their roots firmly set in the city, Viridian FX are turning heads across the film industry. Founder and director Kit Monkman agreed to a chat, and we spoke about what's next for the company, the rise of AI in the creative sector, and why York will remain Viridian's home for the future. I'm very excited to chat to you because I don't know a lot about your business. And when I heard about it, I thought that can't possibly be in the centre of York. This is something we would have heard about. But you guys do some incredible things, especially if you're a movie buff. I think some of our listeners are going to get very excited. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, Viridian FX is a visual effects company. And, you know, as many people will know, visual effects is really a huge part now of pretty much all film and TV, high-end TV. And it can be something very simple, like a period drama in which it's just a kind of matter of removing from the shot some bits of telegraph poles or elements that kind of give the game away. Or it can be something much more sophisticated, you know, where a lot of things now are shot against a blue or green screen, and then whole new worlds are kind of inserted into that space to give the sense of a kind of reality beyond what's possible to film.
So this, what we're talking about here, for people who may not know, so am I right in thinking this is when you see in documentaries and sort of the making of films, you see actors standing in front of big green screens or big blue screens. So what you do is take that green screen and turn it into whatever needs to be behind. So all the sort of visualization that goes on behind. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's absolutely it. It's really working, you know, often with the directors and producers to envision what those worlds should look like. And then absolutely, as you say, kind of removing the blue or the green screen and inserting a world that, you know, with the intention clearly being at the end of it, that the audience sit at home and just are immersed in the world that they're presented with, whether it's dragons or spaceships or Napoleonic wars or whatever. The expectation of contemporary audiences is to be shown. So whereas maybe 30 years ago, an expensive battle scene, you might do everything you could to avoid showing the battle. You know, I think nowadays the audience expectation is to see more, and therefore there's always more work for visual effects artists. Let's
talk a little bit about some of the work that you've done, because I was very excited to hear one of the projects that you worked on was House of the Dragon, which was the Game of Thrones spin-off, which is a fantastic series. Can I just say, and I'm not saying this just because I'm here, I watched an old rerun of an episode of Game of Thrones at the weekend. And then when you compare that to how House of the Dragon has been produced, it's the worlds apart in the way that the special effects are so beautiful in House of the Dragon. Not to say that Game of Thrones wasn't beautiful, but I think things have come so far so quickly, haven't they?
They have. And I mean, I think from our perspective, I mean, that's in some senses wonderful, but also it's an existential threat because things do move so quickly. And I'm sure we'll touch on this later, but AI, of course, is a huge part of the future for all of us. And you know, as I say, it's really hard to imagine what the world, from our perspective, in the visual effects film world, is going to look like in 3 years' time, let alone 10.
Yeah. So we'll come back onto that, as you say, in a moment, because I think that's quite a big discussion. So you've worked on House of the Dragon.
Yep.
What other projects and films have you worked on?
Well, House of the Dragon kind of opened up the doors, if you like, really, to higher end film and TV. So the streamers, Apple and Amazon and co, Netflix. So recently we have worked on, there was a big Netflix film with Gal Gadot in the summer called Heart of Stone, which, 150 million, I think they spent on that. So that was a huge project for us. We've worked on an ITV show which is forthcoming called Passenger, which I think is coming out in the summer, I think, certainly this year at some point. We're currently working on a Netflix show called Chaos, which is, I think, sort of described as a contemporary version of the kind of Greek mythology with starring Jeff Goldblum. So that could be exciting. Yeah. So quite a lot of very varied things. The other thing with Apple TV, we did some work on The Family Plan, which was one of their big Christmas films.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of kind of exciting stuff. And
like you say, did House of the Dragon kind of open the door to lots of other work?
It did, absolutely. We have been here working on independent film for quite a long time now, and the personnel and the skills that we have in-house haven't really changed over the last 3 or 4 years. But what has absolutely changed was getting the break to do House of Dragon, and that seems to have then given us a kind of qualitative stamp of approval, really, which has meant that all of these other major streamers and shows are now talking to us about doing work, which is, for us, it's fantastic. And I'm sure, again, we'll come on to this, but I think, for a small company outside of London, that's extraordinarily unusual because our industry is almost entirely based in London.
You expect a business like yourselves, like Viridian, to be down south in London in sort of the epicentre, or even Manchester now. But how come you're in York? Why are you here? In the nicest possible way.
Yeah. Well, there's a story obviously behind the history, which I'll tell you. But I think why we're still here is probably just as important. Because now that we are the size we are and growing, obviously there are opportunities to move. But I think we're absolutely committed. Absolutely committed to staying in York and growing in York for lots of reasons. I've lived here all my life. I love it. And we have, I think now we have, at last count, we have 9 different languages spoken as within the company as kind of native first languages.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's quite a diverse group of young people, and they are. I'm absolutely not representative of the demographic of the company. I'm at least 20 years older than the next oldest, and most of them now are in their 20s. So it's a young company, and I think it's very simple. Look, if you're 20 and you want to work in high-end film and TV, but you don't particularly want to go and work in London or LA or New York or one of those huge cities, you want a different kind of quality of life, then I think it's really important that there are places that offer that. And I think, I'm very keen on York's trajectory. It's a UNESCO City of Media Arts, which again, I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. But I love the idea that York becomes the UK's alternative to London, that if you don't want to go and work in a big city, you don't want all that hassle. And if you do, great. I love London. But if you don't, then I really want York to feel like an absolutely obvious second choice, which, it's not yet, but we're definitely, making moves towards that.
Mm. And like you say, you recruit quite a lot of young talent, younger people from all walks of life, all around the world. And you started by taking some students from the University of York, didn't you? Am I right in thinking that? Yeah,
absolutely. And they are largely still students that we employ, and we take kind of graduates, and largely at the moment from the universities in the south of England. But yes, the genesis of the company was the University of York. Tom Mattinson, who's one of the other directors of the company, and I were trying to make an experimental green screen film, which, to make on a budget a 90-minute film shot entirely on green screen is kind of foolhardy, to say the least. And we sort of, I think we didn't know how foolhardy it was, but we knew it was foolhardy. So, and we knew that the only way we could conceivably afford to do that would be working with people at the beginnings of their career. So we went to the university, who I had a good relationship with, and said, have you got any recent graduates who you'd recommend that we might work with? And they put forward a group of people. We hired 6 of them. And the university very generously offered us space and equipment. And with the kind of all of those following wins, we were able to make the film. Extraordinarily, it was delivered to Universal Pictures, so it was kind of had to be delivered. But it was very experimental, and we probably made it 3 times because we kept making it and then realizing we'd made it even more poorly than we might have, and so we made it again. But in that process of experimentation and tearing up the rule book and really having to think about every process, and I think the really critical thing here is that had we gone to these students and said we're trying to make a conventional film, then they would have been just cheap labour. And I think the message would have been not only are they cheap labour, but that actually there are people out there who know how to make this film, and it's just not you. And so therefore, all they've got to do is bridge that gap. I think in this instance, because it was such an experimental film, had we even gone to one of the biggest companies in London, not only would they have said it's going to cost you 20 million, but they'd have said, we don't know how to do this. We think you're mad. And I think there was something really exciting in that experimental approach, because it allowed these kids, and they were essentially kids then, to feel totally empowered to try to work out how everything worked. And it wasn't just a question of trying to fill in the knowledge gap. It was actually acquiring knowledge for themselves. And they weren't just a visual effects company. They were on set. They did this kind of pre-visualization before we even got on set. They were embedded in the whole filmmaking process. And that's actually very rare. Within our industry, post-production and visual effects tend to be very separate silos at the end of production. It's quite rare for a junior visual effects artist to ever go anywhere near a film set. Whereas for us, it's always been embedded. And I think that's been a huge part of the success of the company. And when we're now working with the big showrunners at House of Dragon and so on, it's one of the things they really value in our company, I think, is the fact that we approach problems as filmmakers rather than as just a visual effects service.
So this is a daft question. If I was wanting to study something that would get me into this world, what sort of subjects do you have to, or what kind of degree or qualifications do you have to be able to work in this industry or in special effects?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a number of answers to that. In the sense that obviously, based on the story of Viridian, when the original 6 joined, they didn't have any specific expertise in visual effects. I think they'd all done an MA in post-production, which included a small section on visual effects, but they weren't, fully visual effects cognizant. So it's clear that it's possible to start as we did and build into something significant. That said, now, because obviously we are a growing company, and although the culture is hugely important to us and we want to maintain that sense of curiosity and enthusiasm and filmmaking kind of spirit, we can't afford to take on people who were as unskilled as we all were when we started. So we still try to hire from graduates, but we tend to go to people who have done a BA or BSc in visual effects. There are a handful of universities in the UK that are particularly strong. There's one in Bournemouth University in Hertfordshire. And we take a kind of vast majority of our new talent from those places. Yeah. We're very keen to try to develop more strength, if you like, in the north. Work with the universities to try to make that a kind of more regionally balanced.
Yeah. So going back to the reasons why you're here in York, right in the centre of York, when a movie is going through production, You have to bear with me because I don't know all the jargon. But when a movie's going through production, do you have to travel to the set? Do you have to be part of that process as well? Or are you very much kind of separate to the actual filming side of it and the practical side of it?
No, it's a really interesting question. I mean, the answer is it varies. In our background of working on independent film, we would tend to be the only visual effects provider for the whole film. And often we would be working right from the early script stage to actually envision what this world would look like. So, for example, there's a sci-fi movie we worked on maybe 5 or 6 years ago now that we built the spaceships. We built everything before they'd even built a set. So everything was built around the visual effects. And in many ways, that's the most exciting way to work. Clearly, the more you go up the food chain, when you get to the House of the Dragons and beyond, then that's not the same process at all. You're very much more one of a number of companies who are doing the visual effects, and you're at the other end of the chain. Yeah. I think one of our ambitions is very much, and it's an ambition that we feel we're quite close to now, is getting to a point where we are back to where we started, but working on a big show for Netflix or Amazon or Apple. Yeah. So we are the sole vendor. And we also now have this post-production company, which is part of the same company as our Viridian, FX, visual effects company, but it's called Motion. It's a sort of separate brand. Yeah. And that does picture post and sound post. So we could theoretically now do all of the film's post-production in-house here.
Okay. Just explain what that means, what picture post means.
Well, picture post, the way I look at it, which I'm sure there are people here within the company who would be, their toes will curl when I say this, but essentially it's like Instagram for grown-ups. It's a kind of, you get your film back from basically from the camera, from the edit, and then you can make it look, you give it a kind of mood, if you like, just as you might with an Instagram filter. It's not quite that simple, but it's essentially the same idea. So, films have a look and a feel that's very much given to them by colorists, and colorists are huge jobs within the industry of people who basically work with the camera team to define what the final image will look like.
Between These Walls is a podcast just for York. We want to keep it growing and provide more local content that you want to hear. So there are 3 ways you can help. Firstly, I'm on the lookout for local sponsors. If you're from a York business and want to promote on this podcast, drop us an email to btw@soapyproductions.co.uk. That's btw@soapy productions.co.uk. Secondly, if you know someone who should be featured on Between These Walls, let me know. I'm looking for the people who make York special. That's anyone from an interesting business or with an unusual story, perhaps a charity doing amazing things, or someone working hard under the radar to make York better. Let me know who I need to talk to. Just email btw@soapyproductions.co.uk. And finally, you can help this podcast grow right now by subscribing. Wherever you're listening, just hit the subscribe button and that helps us out massively. Also, follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn if you just search for Between These Walls York. Thank you. Now back to the conversation. When you look at the end credits of a movie or a series and you see, it always blows my mind how many people and how many different companies that are brought together just for one production, for one film. How does it feel to be a part of something like that and be kind of one of the cogs in the machine?
Gosh, good question. I'm possibly the wrong person to answer this because the team who are really contributing to what you see are in this building, but they're not me.
Yeah.
So I'm very proud of them. I'm very proud of the work they do, and delighted that my name kind of is associated with theirs. But actually, I don't have that same, I think, excitement that they probably do of actually looking at a shot and knowing how hard it was and how much effort they put into it and how good it looks. Every so often I do look over people's shoulders and you see the kind of before and after of a shot, and it's staggering sometimes. You you see what was shot and it looks incredibly kind of mundane and uninspiring. And then you see this finished shot, which is kind of extraordinary and full of vibrancy and life and storytelling.
Yeah.
So no, I'm hugely proud of them, and I think yeah, absolutely, it's fantastic to be part of an industry, I think, which is exciting and tells stories and is kind of vibrant and huge part of our culture.
I loved having a look at these show reels, and I urge anybody who's listening to this to just go and have a look at the show reels on your website, because it kind of gives you a sense of what you do. And like you say, the sort of sweeps where you see the shot as it happens and then the sweep to show what the special effects have done is really incredible.
Yeah.
And it blows my mind, particularly things like the space shot, the sci-fi work that you've done, and just the vast sort of things like spaceships and the stars in the background. I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I mean, I'm as in awe as you are, because I say that because because I don't do the work. But yeah, I mean, it's and particularly because I know from where this company's kind of come and how sort of naive we all were at the beginning.
Yeah.
So no, it's been a really exciting journey, and hopefully will continue to be. And going back to talking about York, it just suddenly occurred to me we were talking about education and the fact that at the moment we largely get our graduates from southern universities. As you know, and I guess many of the people listening know, and many probably don't know, is that York is a UNESCO City of Media Arts.
Yeah.
And it's been that way since 2014. And I think, although there are a number of people who've worked incredibly hard to keep that designation going and make it what it is, I think there's a sort of sense in which maybe as a city we haven't embraced it in the way that we might, despite all of their efforts. We're trying now to do that. And I think one of the key elements for me, certainly, is that I think it only really becomes a relevant designation when everybody in the city, so let's say, I mean, for example, a taxi driver picks up somebody from York Station and is proud that York is a UNESCO City of Media Arts. And I think that only really happens when it impacts everybody in the city. And I think that only happens really when it's embedded in our education throughout the city. So if you're a primary school in York all the way up to higher education, you feel that being in the city gives you opportunities to get into the industry that you wouldn't otherwise have. And that's something we're working very closely with at the moment with the City Council and the city-wide region, if you like, to really try to work out how in 5 or 10 years' time that can be fundamentally changed. Yeah,
I agree. And I'm sorry to say that I only heard that recently. I didn't know that was the case, that York had that. And I know a lot of people that don't, and I've mentioned it to a couple of my friends. People don't know that York has this status.
Yeah.
And that it could be an epicentre for media and arts.
It will be.
And it will be. It will be. Yeah, absolutely right attitude. So yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree with you there. Well, fantastic. And it's great that you're very sort of tapped into that and passionate about wanting to be able to bring more young people into the industry, and especially local.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I mean, partly I love the city. Spent most of my life here, and I'm really proud and happy that I have. But also, I mean, I think, it's selfish in a way. I mean, we have, as I said earlier, we have these 9 different languages spoken here. We've got lots of young people who all are really talented and could go and work anywhere in the world, but we want to keep them here. And I think it's really important to invest in the city so that the culture around us as a company is sticky. It's full of bars and clubs and things that are happening that young people want to be part of. Because if we neglect all that, then, it's going to be really hard to retain and attract young people to come and work here. So, it's partly that I believe totally in the city and I want to put something back, but it is also partly selfish. Like I want to have an environment in which, young people want to be here and thrive here and just tell their friends what a great place it is.
Yeah. And I suppose on that note then, what does the future hold? And we mentioned AI briefly. Let's talk about that. The future of the industry. How are you feeling about it at the moment? And there's a lot of talk, and obviously the strikes last year was very much based around the sort of rise of AI and what that could entail for the industry. How are you feeling about that?
I feel a combination of petrified and excited, I think. I mean, I've always been interested in technology and the way it's driving culture. And I'm fairly long in the tooth. I mean, you can't see me necessarily, but I'm certainly not in the first flush of youth. So I've been here long enough to know the rate of change. And throughout my lifetime, the rate of change it's been speeding up, but it's been relatively human. You kind of can grasp it. I think what's extraordinary now is, ChatGPT launched, just over a year ago, and is now so extraordinarily powerful that we're just on the cusp of an exponential growth in a tool that for the first time in human history we don't know how to control. So predicting anything at the moment is tough. What we do have here is we've got another part of the company we call Viridian Lab, and their job really is to look over the horizon at what's coming and try to stay abreast of change, which is getting increasingly difficult. Because obviously a lot of what we do, although we apply it to film and television, is equally applicable to virtual reality and augmented reality and all sorts of other new forms that are emerging or have emerged. So, I think in one sense it's an existential threat to us, because I think if we stayed still, pretty likely that in 5 years' time, 80% of what we currently do will be being done by some kind of artificial intelligence. I think it's also really exciting because new things will emerge. I mean, podcasts didn't exist 15 years ago. Yeah. There are always new things that come out of technology. It feels like a challenge to all of us. And I think what's exciting, probably, and what excites me most is that I think value is going to shift. And I think this also plays into the York story. I think since the Second World War, the kind of meme, if you like, behind the West's development has been around growth, it's been around efficiency, it's been around scale, all of things which are quite mechanized. And so, a really good example, I think, would be that, you now ring up the electricity board or whatever, and you get somebody probably in another country who's reading from a script. And so essentially they're being asked to be a computer, but not a very good one. So AI will begin to take, and I'm not blaming those people at all. I mean, that's it's not their problem that they are being asked to work like that, but they are. And I think AI will absolutely rampage through our kind of attempt to mechanize the human experience. So where does that leave us? I think it leaves us with value shifting much more to the human. And I think, certainly for someone like Viridian, we see, even if there's a future in 15, 20 years' time where we do very little of the work, that interface between a creative person who wants to achieve something and the way it gets achieved is really important. And the human understanding that goes into being able to listen and articulate a problem and present it back in a challenging and interesting way and then solve it. I think those are the things that are increasingly value will accrete to, because certainly, I mean, who knows? I mean, AI may have may by the time this podcast goes out have solved all of this, and there's absolutely nothing for us to do. But that's certainly where I think value will go. So, for example, another example way outside of my industry, I think really good boutique hotels are probably going to be much more valued than great big multinational chains. I just think generally throughout the whole of human experience, there's going to be a shift from the large and impersonal to the small and personal, which, as I say, I think plays back into the York story of trying to say, look, why not privilege your standard of living? Why not come and live and work in a place that there's a balance, and you can walk to work and you can walk your dog and you can see, live amongst history and culture. And I think there's a real opportunity to make that into a story that, for the first time, for a long time, certainly totally aligns with making work at the highest level. Yeah. It's no longer parochial. It's no longer a backwater. It's right at the forefront of what's happening in the world.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying there. And the sort of sense of bringing life back to local community as opposed to
absolutely
sort of further afield.
Absolutely. I think in every sense, the local is going to become more and more valued. Yeah, particularly, every chance that in 10 years' time we'll all having our soap operas made for us individually on our laptops or on our phones or whatever.
There's an episode of Black Mirror that's based on that
I'm
on
sure
Netflix, which is quite scary.
Yeah.
It's a very entertaining episode. But I digress. Just sort of still on the point of AI, from my point of view, working in the sort of creative industry, I sort of see the fastest pace of AI, and I don't know a lot about AI, it seems to be the growth of things like content creation. And is that something that do you think is going to affect you and your company fairly soon, in terms of could AI create all the visual effects for a film and without any need for you guys, do you think, fairly soon? Do you think that's something that's going to happen?
Well, I think it's something we've got to believe might happen. And already AI is influencing a lot of what we do. I think, as with so many things, and again, I really hesitate to predict anything with AI because it's moving so quickly. But based on what we currently know, the final AI might be able to, in many areas, take you 80% of the way. But actually, in our industry, it's the final 20% in the way people pay for, because that's what marks out, as you say, a really beautiful shot from something that feels mundane. And now, of course, that may change, but I think we have to believe at the moment that there is a kind of high ground that you can stake out. But having said all of that, I mean, absolutely, I think that the relationship between all of us as content creators, and you two, and I think most people who in any way are content creators, that relationship with AI as a kind of co-pilot is growing all the time. And I think I certainly, I mean, we've been trying to put together an idea for an augmented reality piece based on Don Quixote, 17th century Spanish novel, which is like a doorstop. It's 800 pages long. And although I read it, I couldn't for life of me tell you where something happens and on what page or what chapter. And I was involved talking with ChatGPT and expecting actually not very much. I asked it, to help me do a précis and write a script. And I was absolutely confounded, really, not only by the fact that it was able to tell me that something happened in Volume 2, Chapter 16, quite specifically and accurately, but also I think what really surprised me, given the fact that I'd played around with ChatGPT only 6 months before and none of this was possible, was how conversational it became. So it was very much like, I really like the idea that you've suggested for this scene, but perhaps this character's not quite working. And it would come back with, okay, I understand, here's an alternative suggestion, but it would be very specific, and you could really have a granular conversation with it. I mean, wasn't necessarily as certainly not as informative as having a conversation with a real expert on Don Quixote, but much more useful than having a conversation with somebody who'd never read the book or who even read the book and not really engaged with it.
Yeah.
So it is. I mean, I think it's on every level. It's becoming more and more daunting, extraordinary. But also, I think that's what I was saying about the co-pilot quality. I mean, I think we should all be leaning into trying to find ways to use it engagedly and creatively.
I mean, there's a lot of scaremongering, isn't there? And there's a lot of negative press around AI. But I always think, there's always got to be a positive, and we must be able to think of a way to make sure that it is a positive force in the world and that it actually helps us as humans in whatever way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And again, I mean, going back to the Don Quixote idea, I mean, I think the thing with AI that is increasingly, I think, going to be the challenge is asking the right questions, and that's a very human thing. If you don't ask the right questions, you're not going to get interesting answers. And if you also don't know how to editorialize the answers and go, yeah, that, but not that, then equally you're not going to get very far. And I think, in some senses, that's just what we all do anyway, I think. I mean, we, certainly working within the creative industry, it's very easy to people to pretend or to think that they are wonderfully creative. But actually, most of us are just editors. we take ideas and we kind of go, yeah, that one, but not that one. And developing your own creative voice is very much that editorial process of going, I like that, but I don't like that. And I think that's perfectly possible to do in relationship with the AI as well.
Brilliant. Well, it's great to hear from somebody who knows a lot about how, or has very good opinions on how AI can be kind of augmented into real life. Let's go back to some of the work that you've done. And I'd like to ask you the question of what's your favourite thing, favourite project or favourite film that you have worked on as a company? Is that an impossible question to answer?
I think it is a really hard question to answer. I mean, I think in terms of cultural reach and polish, it's hard to look beyond House of the Dragon. It's just such a beautiful thing to look at and so well made. I think emotionally, for all its flaws, we would probably, many of us here might still hold quite a strong place in our heart for the very first film we made, which is a thing called The Knife That Killed Me, which is a really odd beast and, uneven as a film, but because it was the genesis of the company, I think still feels really significant to all of us. And it was brave and it was experimental. And, I think I personally have always been interested in trying to make things that push boundaries of what is possible rather than trying to make things for a market.
Can you watch a film without focusing on the special effects? Has it changed the way, being in this industry, has it changed the way that you view a film or something on television? Are you constantly looking at the work and how it's been made rather than actually watching the thing on screen?
Yes and no. I mean, I think absolutely when I was more closely involved with actually the work here, and I became less involved when I realised how bad I was at it. But when I was initially involved, I think absolutely that was the case, that you'd look at shots and you'd be trying to work out what had been done and whether it had been done successfully or not. And it did pull you out of the story. And I suspect that is the case for a lot of the people here, but you need to ask them. I think for me now, because I don't do that on a daily, I don't do that at all. I've kind of recovered my ability to just enjoy. But I think, like anything, I mean, because we're involved in the industry more broadly as well, of course, there's an element of you begin to see the tricks and it's like, I imagine watching a magician when you're, part of the Magician's Guild, you kind of know each other's tricks and you know what's been gone on and you know the things they're trying to hide and the things they're proud of. So to some extent, but I still, I mean, the lovely thing about film and TV is that it's still a circus. It's still showmanship, and I kind of embrace all of that, I think.
Have you ever watched a film and wished it was something that you'd made or that you'd been a part of and gone, God, that's really good. I wish we could have been a part of that.
Oh, God. Well, I suppose, yeah. I don't know. That's a really difficult question. I mean, there's so much good stuff that's being made, both with and without kind of visual effects.
Yeah.
But I think, the interesting thing about the UK industry is it's so small that actually, increasingly one knows at least 2 or 3 people on most projects. So there's a kind of at least reflective sort of pride one can take in many things.
Yeah. And like we sort of mentioned before earlier on in the conversation, that kind of doors opened for you probably a lot sooner than you'd anticipated with the House of the Dragon work. And I suppose, is it quite a closed network, quite closed community in the film industry that once you sort of get on one project, you start to know people and kind of get to do a bit of networking?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think I think this is really difficult, really. I mean, it's hard to see how it changes, but it is difficult for young and emerging talent across the board because, film it's very expensive still, and very collaborative. So you have teams which sort of, although, I think man or woman in the street would say it's a really creative industry. And yes, it is. It's also a very risk-averse industry because people put a lot of money into projects and then they want to see a return. And the idea of empowering young people with not much track record is people tend to shy away from that for very obvious reasons. But the net result is that you tend not to get as much risk taking. You tend, and this is across the board. So even with Viridian, I mean, the only thing that changed really when we got House of the Dragon was that we got House of the Dragon.
Yeah.
And that once you've done that, then other people go, okay, they are clearly reputable, they will deliver, they are good. They've got the sort of seal of approval, if you like, and trying, I think, at any point in the industry for anybody, whether they're a director, producer, camera operator, whatever, try to get those breaks. It is really hard. And again, it brings me back to the idea of a kind of UNESCO creative city or city of media arts, is that trying to find environments where people can experiment and can take risks and make short films. We obviously have Aesthetica, the great short film festival here, probably the best in the UK, right in the heart of York. So, I think if we had young filmmakers here making experimental projects, taking risks, I think there's a really nice way of trying to embody a culture that we believe would actually improve the British film industry across the board.
Yeah. And you've already said that your ambition is to stay here in York and
Absolutely,
grow.
Yeah.
What's kind of the next step for the company then?
Look, I think we have no ambition to become a sort of 150 seat company because, as I've said earlier, I mean, I think the values of the creativity, filmmaking are so embedded in the culture here that we don't want to grow beyond a certain size because we'll lose that. Having said that, we do want to grow increasingly in terms of the kind of quality and reputation, the work that we do. And also, I think we want to grow across mediums. So, we're very interested in working in new and emerging fields, AR, VR, all sorts of new technologies coming over the hill. I think for us, storytelling is always going to be a kind of core theme. So, I mean, although we're interested in augmented reality and virtual reality and the things I've talked about, I don't think we're interested in just making visuals for games or whatever. We're interested in always trying to tell a story with our work. I think really what I would love is if in an ideal world, in 5 or 10 years' time, that Viridian is one of a number of post-production companies in York. So actually I'm kind of inviting competition because I think it would be healthy for the city.
Yeah.
I hope that York itself has gained a reputation for excellence within this kind of world and across games, films, TV. And I like to see, young people joining from across the world to come and work here because they see Viridian as being somewhere that offers something that very few other places do, which is an opportunity to be a craftsperson, to really engage with the creative elements of filmmaking and producers and showrunners at the kind of highest creative level. You can have a quality of life here with absolutely not in any way compromising the quality of work that you do or who you do it for. So I think, to establish all of that beyond doubt would feel like a really, really solid achievement.
What would your message be to any young aspiring person who wanted to work in this industry?
Ooh, that's so difficult because I think the answer maybe is quite different depending on the role. Yeah. So, if I'm in my head as I am thinking about it, I'm thinking partly as a visual effects artist, obviously, where we might have very different criteria about what made somebody attractive to us than somebody who wants to be a director or actually involved in the creative side of on-set filmmaking. But I think probably in every instance, what's the kind of the generality that runs through it, the universal thing? I suspect it's attitude, really. Yeah. That I think if you care about the story and and your own story as well, and why you are trying to do what you do, then you're always going to, certainly to people like me, you're going to be more attractive than people who just see it as a kind of transaction. I mean, I've always had this very strong sense of the distinction between work and labour, and for me, labour is a transaction where you say, give me X amount of money for my time and I'll give you my time, and I'll be really professional about that and whatever, but it's a transaction. It's a very relatively simple one. Work, which I think is, the heart of human history, is, and I may sound like I'm over romanticizing this, but I'm trying not to, because I know work can sometimes be bloody miserable. But work is, on the whole, when you start a process and finish it and you see the process through. So it might be the washing up, or it might be carving something, but you actually understand your role in it, and it's basically a story. It's part of a journey. You go from one end of it to the other, and I think people get a lot more satisfaction from work than they do from labour. I kind of want to make Viridian feel like a place of work rather than a place of labour, and I include play in work as well. I mean, I'm not saying it's just a place of work, but I don't, I kind of not that interested in people who just want to come and sell their time to us. I'd rather that people came because they wanted to engage in a process that actually they were enthralled by.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. Well, Kit, it's been absolutely wonderful speaking to you. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed having a chat to you. So thank you very much. Best of luck for the future. I'm going to be looking out and seeing what your next projects are, and definitely watching some of the stuff that you've already done, that you've worked on. Great. And thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much.
This is a Soapy Productions podcast.